Okay. So we got to talk because this was 100% not the video that I was going to do. I actually had a plan. I had a huge script for the next video that I was going to make about J.K. Rowling, which ironically was going to be called Turf Wars, which apparently is what J.K. Rowling has now called her latest essay on her website, which is about the turf situation. It's weird that we apparently had the same thought on this. That's interesting. So I thought, instead of reading this 27-page essay and making a whole video, that was my plan, I would instead post this first. So this is going to be me reacting to J.K. Rowling's essay that she posted on her website about the danger of the tran. Wow, my dog is not having this. Okay. I was reading some of this and I literally can't, you guys. I don't know why she's like this. I really don't. I wish she'd stop. Okay. So, she starts it off by J.K. Rowling writes about her reasons for speaking out on sex and gender issues. Oh boy. Okay. Warning, this piece contains inappropriate language for children. So, if you're a child and watching this, get out. This isn't an easy piece to write for reasons that will shortly become clear, but I know it's time to explain myself on an issue surrounded by toxicity. I write this without any desire to add to that toxicity. Okay, Karen. For people who don't know, last December I tweeted my support for Maya Forrester, a tax specialist who lost her job for what were deemed transphobic, and transphobic is in quotes, tweets. She took her case to an employment tribunal, asking the judge to rule on whether a philosophical belief that sex is determined by biology is protected in law. Judge Taylor ruled it wasn't, because sex is not determined by biology. Actually, I'm going to include in this video a TikTok from a biological researcher who is also a trans woman on what she says about biology. It was really, really fascinating. I learned a lot. I didn't even know all this, so I'm going to include that somewhere in this.
Okay, so as somebody who is both a biologist and trans, it really bothers me how often I hear, okay, I understand your gender identity, but you're still biologically a man or a woman, right? No, that's not how biological sex works, despite what we were all taught in 4th grade. Biological sex is a complex combination of chromosomes, hormones, and secondary sex characteristics, and each one has enormous variation in it. There are people who are XX and XY, but also X and XXY. Secondary sex characteristics too. There's not just a couple of different types of parts, y'all. Hormones as well, enormous variation. And when you take into account all that variation in between different people, you get different biological sexes, like somebody who is XY, but with a fully functioning uterus. Our society has chosen to limit biological sex to M, F, or intersex, which means that biological sex is just as much of a social construct as gender is. Okay?
My interest in trans issues predated Maya's case by almost 2 years, during which I followed the debate around the concept of gender identity closely. Concept. We're a concept. It's a concept. I've met trans people and read sundry books, blogs, and articles by trans people, gender specialists, intersex people, psychologists, safeguarding experts, social workers, and doctors, and followed the discourse online and in traditional media. Well, that certainly makes you an expert on trans people now, doesn't it? On one level, my interest in this issue has been professional, because I'm writing a crime series set in the present day, and my fictional female detective is of an age to be interested in and affected by these issues herself. But on another, it is intensely personal, as I'm about to explain. Okay. All the time I've been researching and learning, accusations and threats from trans activists have been bubbling in my Twitter timeline. This was initially triggered by a like when I started taking an interest in gender identity and transgender matters. I began screenshotting comments that interested me as a way of reminding myself what I might want to research later. On one occasion, I absent-mindedly liked instead of screenshotting. That single like was deemed evidence of wrongthink, and a persistent low level of harassment began. Now listen, I don't support harassing people. Look, I'm just not that girl, so you do you. I'm not really for that, but, you know, okay. Sorry, girl. I don't know what to tell you. I mean, I did make a lot of videos, but I didn't tag you in them, and the things I've said personally to you on Twitter have been pretty polite, all things considered. But yeah, I just think it's so funny that you took an interest in trans people like it's a fucking research experiment. We're not... Oh, girl, I don't even have time for this. Months later, I compounded my accidental like crime by following Magdalene Burns on Twitter. Magdalene was an immensely brave young feminist and lesbian. Oh, here she goes again, bringing up the lesbian thing as if somehow that makes everything better. Okay, so here's my problem with this, right? And this is one of the things I'm going to talk about in the essay, the video essay. She is doing this thing now where she's bringing up lesbians in this transphobic conversation as if somehow one lesbian speaks for all lesbians, and as if somehow they are the be-all end-all when it comes to trans issues. I kind of have a lot of issues with that. Who was dying of an aggressive brain tumor. I'm not, that's unfortunate, it really is, but it's irrelevant. I followed her because I wanted to contact her directly, which I succeeded in doing. However, as Magdalene was a great believer in the importance of biological sex and didn't believe lesbians should be called bigots for not dating trans women with penises, dots were joined in the heads of Twitter trans activists, and the level of social media abuse increased. Dots were connected because you followed someone who is transphobic. I'm sorry. Now, let me be clear. I am not saying that a lesbian has to be interested in me or any other trans woman who is pre-op. You didn't need to bring up the genitalia thing. That's kind of irrelevant here too, but we'll move on. But yeah, no one has to date anyone. I think if you're not attracted to someone, that's fine. But I also feel like, you know, being attracted to women is not the same as being attracted to someone's genitalia, and I think that's what's being confused here. I don't believe that any gay person is specifically just attracted to someone's genitalia. And again, as I'm going to point out in this essay later, I understand that to a certain point there is a sort of revulsion that exists in the lesbian community towards penises for obvious reasons. That's fine, that's fair. But I also think it's funny that that's valid and that is something that's considered valid, but a lot of lesbians consider it misogynistic if gay men are repulsed by vaginas. I don't quite understand why one is okay but another's not, but that's a whole other argument, and I'm not going to get into that today. I mention all of this only to explain that I knew perfectly well what was going to happen when I supported Maya. I must have been on my 4th or 5th cancellation by then. Okay, Karen. I expected the threats of violence, to be told I was literally killing trans people with my hate. Yeah. I don't see how that's a threat of violence. You know what? I can't speak to what people have been saying. I don't support threats of violence against people. I will say, though, you are promoting danger against trans people by doing this, but go off. Boy, she's really coming for us this Pride, man. I cannot. To be called cunt and bitch, and of course for my books to be burned. Although one particularly abusive man told me he'd composted them. I'm not sure how that specifically is abusive. Maybe he was just abusive in his words, but like composting your books isn't super abusive, but okay. What I didn't expect in the aftermath of my cancellation was the avalanche of emails and letters that came showering down upon me, the overwhelming majority of which were positive, grateful, and supportive. So either A, more people are transphobic than want to admit, or B, you don't really know I can't. Here's the thing. I don't really believe that she's in the majority. It really does seem like most people are on trans people's sides, but maybe there are some people who just do not get it and who are TERFs, and that's unfortunate, but avalanche of emails and letters, of overwhelming majority of which were positive. Okay. They came from a cross-section of kind, empathetic, and intelligent people, some of them working in fields dealing with gender dysphoria and trans people, who are all deeply concerned about the socio-political concept that is influencing politics, medical practice, and safeguarding. So what it's influencing is bullshit. Okay, because first of all, safeguarding, I think that's trans medicalism, which is the idea that in order to be trans, you have to do things a certain way. You have to be on hormones, you have to get surgery, you have to do blah, 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 which is bullshit because you can do whatever the fuck you want. You don't have to be a certain type of trans, or you could be non-binary, which is not included, whatever. Okay. Let's move on. This is going to be a long-ass video if I don't get to this point, because this is a long-ass essay. I wrote an essay, and this bitch wrote an essay, because apparently she's not fucking playing with us. Holy shit. They're worried about the dangers to young people, gay people, and about the erosion of women's and girls' rights. Above all, they're worried about a climate of fear that serves nobody, least of all trans youth, well. Okay, that sentence was really shitty. But anyway, basically, apparently, what she thinks is that trans people are creating dangers to young people, which is transphobia. Danger to gay people, which I assume she means lesbians, because that's the only thing she cares about anymore. Climate of fear. The only person who is creating a climate of fear, bitch, is you. But okay, go off. That serves nobody, least of all trans youth. I don't believe you give one shit about trans youth. I really don't. I'd stepped back from Twitter for many months, both before and after tweeting support for Maya, because I knew it was doing nothing good for my mental health. That's smart. I will say that. But also, you can't tweet and be against a group of people and be against people's right to be themselves and then expect them not to call you out for it. I don't understand that. You know what I mean? And then be like, it's my mental health. Like, mental health is important, and I take that very seriously as someone who deals with anxiety and who has in the past dealt with depression. Like, I'm very supportive of mental health and all of that, but I think it's kind of annoying when people just are like, it's my mental health. I have to do this thing for my mental health. Like, okay, but you're not acknowledging the fact that you did something and said something transphobic. Like, okay, Mary, whatever. I only returned because I wanted to share a free children's book during the pandemic, which you did do, and if you just kept to that, we would have been fine. Immediately, activists who clearly believe themselves to be good, kind, and progressive people swarmed back into my timeline, assuming a right to police my speech, accuse me of hatred, call me misogynistic slurs, and above all, as every woman involved in this debate will know, TERF. Okay. But actually, it wasn't that you just talked about a book that this happened. You actually tweeted about the article in question that I will put the Twitter picture right here. And it was a whole thing about how you didn't like the fact that they said people who menstruate instead of women, because to you, the only people who menstruate are women, which is not the case, but go off. If you didn't already know, and why should you? Ooh! TERF is an acronym coined by trans activists. Incorrect. TERF was coined by TERFs. Don't get it twisted. They happily call themselves TERFs. Do not misunderstand, ma'am. They happily call themselves TERFs. So do not try and put this on us. That's like people who are like, I don't like when you call people cis. Like, we didn't come up with that. That's not fair. Okay, girl. This is some bullshit. Which stands for Trans Exclusionary Radical Feminist. In practice, a huge and diverse cross-section of women are currently being called TERFs, and the vast majority have never been radical feminists. That's true. There is nothing radical or feminist about being trans exclusionary. The more you know. Examples of so-called TERFs range from the mother of a gay child who was afraid their child wanted to transition to escape homophobic bullying, to a hitherto totally unfeminist older lady who's vowed never to visit a Marks and Spencer again because they're allowing any man who says they identify as a woman into the women's changing rooms. Okay, but if you identify as a woman, you're not a man, and no man is going into the women's changing room to change into women's clothing or a dress, let's say, because that's not inherently women's clothing, but that's a whole other issue. So here's the problem. You're trying to claim that you're not trans exclusionary, you're not a TERF, you're not all of these horrible things, but you're spouting all of their rhetoric, which makes you seem like you're like a shitty person. Like, do you not understand this? Do you not understand that this isn't just coming out of nowhere? Like, you're bringing this anger and vitriol kind of upon yourself because you're being hateful. You're spouting all of their bullshit. So you have to understand what is happening here, right? Let me continue. Ironically, radical feminists aren't even trans exclusionary. They include trans men in their feminism because they were born women. No, they don't. No, they don't. I'll tell you, because I've read specifically from TERFs. And again, this was something I was going to bring up in my essay. TERFs consider trans men to be traitors who have been poisoned by testosterone. Do not fuck with me. They do not include trans men at all. And don't start with this born women. First of all, no, they were not born women. They were assigned female at birth, maybe. You're not born a woman. You grow up to be a woman. If you take the time to say women and girls when you're talking about women and girls' rights being taken away by trans people, you shouldn't say that someone was born a woman or born a man. You were not born a full-grown ass adult. Some people don't ever become full-grown ass adults because they're childish. Can I just say, J.K. Rowling is a fucking clown. Oh my God, but not a funny clown. But accusations of TERFery have been sufficient to intimidate many people, institutions, and organizations I once admired who are cowering before the tactics of the playground. They'll call us transphobic. They'll say I hate trans people. What next? They'll say you've got fleas? Ma'am, okay. Apparently, saying someone is transphobic is equivalent to saying you have fleas. I don't know where the fuck she's going with that one. Speaking as a biological woman, a lot of people in positions of power really need to grow a pair. So that's what we call, what is that word? I know there's a word for that. I believe it's called sexism. And it's funny because you're using toxic masculinity and the patriarchy to prove. Wait, what? What? I don't grow up. Okay. See, this is my problem with this kind of white feminism. And was going to bring this up in the essay because I think it's very important. So J.K. Rowling espouses what a lot of people call white feminism, which is to say not necessarily just about white people, but white feminism is a brand of feminism that is not intersectional, which means it doesn't recognize that a lot of things are more than just one thing. And the biggest problem with white feminism like this is that it misunderstands the idea that actually men are also harmed by toxic masculinity and the patriarchy. When you tell a man to man up, or be a man, or grow a pair, you are literally contributing to the patriarchy. That she doesn't see the irony is really hilarious. Which is doubtless literally possible according to the kind of people who argue that clownfish prove humans aren't a dimorphic species. What is this bitch talking about? Who brought up clownfish? The fact that clownfish can change sex? Yeah, that is very interesting. But I would also argue that the point is that being trans or transitioning has nothing to do, it's not a uniquely human thing. As much as people have said that homosexuality also exists in other species besides humans. So where the fuck are you going with this, girl? So why am I doing this? Why speak up? Why not quietly do my research and keep my head down? Because you don't know how. Well, I've got 5 reasons for being worried about new trans activism, and deciding I need to speak up. And everyone else needs you to shut up. Firstly, I have a charitable trust that focuses on alleviating social deprivation in Scotland, with a particular emphasis on women and children. Among other things, my trust supports projects for female prisoners and survivors of domestic and sexual abuse. I also fund medical research into MS, a disease that behaves very differently in men and women. It's been clear to me for a while that the new trans activism is having, or is likely to have, if all its demands are met, a significant impact on many of the causes I support, because it's pushing to erode the legal definition of sex and replace it with gender. What the actual fuck does that have to do with anything? Literally, what does that have to do with anything? Because, you know, in one of your tweets, you brought up that you empathize and... what else did she say? It was like empathize and... something else, or feel a kinship with trans people because they are also subject to violence against their person by men. So domestic violence, which does happen to trans women, particularly trans women of color. So for the 5 seconds you talked about Black Lives Matter, maybe you would be wise to know that Black trans women are particularly harmed by anti-trans rhetoric like you are fucking spouting. So maybe you should give a shit about that instead of feeling like the thing that I need to do now, I have to go. The second reason is that I am an ex-teacher and the founder of a children's charity, which gives me an interest in both education and safeguarding. Again, she's going on about this goddamn safeguarding. Like, what? Okay. Like many others, I have deep concerns about the effect the trans rights movement is having on both. You're worried about trans rights and education and children? Oh God, this bitch. She's going on about how someone think of the children. We're thinking about the trans children who should not have to deal with dysphoria. Sis. Okay. The third is that as a much banned author, I am interested in freedom of speech and have publicly defended it, even unto Donald Trump. I don't know what that has to do with trans people, but go off.
She thinks if she hits the nerve of Trump, you're going to all forgive her.
Yeah, no. The fourth is where things start to get truly personal. Really? You said you had 5 things that were personal, and you're just now getting to the personal. Okay. I'm concerned about the huge explosion in young women wishing to transition, and also about the increasing numbers who seem to be detransitioning, returning to their original sex, because they regret taking steps that have, in some cases, altered their bodies irrevocably and taken away their fertility. No. Let me tell you a fucking thing, right? Okay, sorry, I hit my mic again. Let me tell you a goddamn thing, right? So in most cases, when it comes to hormonal treatment for trans people, especially young trans people, they're not performing surgeries on children. You are mistaken. I don't know what you've been fucking reading, but it isn't from trans people, and it isn't from fucking doctors either. They do not perform surgeries on young people, okay? They give them therapy. They give them medical pills. I'm pretty sure what they give them is like Spiro, which is a hormone blocker, which basically just means they just don't get any of the secondary sex characteristics. So for cis women, or excuse me, trans men in this case, they don't develop large breasts. For trans women, I don't actually know. They don't develop hair, I think. Their voices don't really deepen. Basically all the things that boys would go through during puberty, trans women wouldn't have to go through, or trans young people wouldn't have to go through, because they're on a small pill that is, by the way, very reversible if you stop taking it, because it's just the start. They don't put them on estrogen young. They're not putting them on estrogen until they're like 18, and they're certainly not giving them any kind of surgery until they're 18. And by the by, in case you did not know, even for trans men who are grown-ass adults, they do not like to perform the surgery that trans men need to get rid of the hysterectomy. They don't like to perform that shit unless it is like the 11th hour and that shit is starting to disrupt because they're on testosterone, and testosterone will eat at the, not eat at it, but it does something that kind of fucks up the whole situation, and it's very painful and damaging to a trans man's insides if he doesn't get a hysterectomy. So, no, you're incorrect. Your facts are incorrect. They are not facts because you're I don't know where she's pulling this shit from. I need to zoom out a little bit. I don't know where she's pulling this shit from. Like, where are you getting your information from, ma'am? I look like Willem if Willem let herself go. And that's on period, sis. Jesus. Some say they decided to transition after realizing they were same-sex attracted, and that transitioning was partly driven by homophobia, either in society or in their families. I don't buy that. But okay, you know what? That's fair. Maybe that is something that's happening. I don't really know. But maybe we should end homophobia. I don't fucking know. Most people probably aren't aware, I certainly wasn't, until I started researching this issue properly, that 10 years ago, the majority of people wanting to transition to the opposite sex were male. Trans women. They were trans women. They were not male, they were trans women. That ratio has now reversed. The UK has experienced a 4,400% increase in girls being referred for transitioning treatment. Again, trans men. Autistic girls are hugely overrepresented in their numbers. Why is that relevant? Autistic people aren't allowed to be trans? They aren't allowed to know shit about themselves? Is that what you're saying? Is that what you're saying? Okay. That is a choice. The same phenomenon has been seen in the U.S. has been seen in the U.S. In 2018, American physician and researcher Lisa Littman set out to explore it. In an interview, she said, "Parents online were describing a very unusual pattern of transgender identification, where multiple friends and even entire friend groups became transgender identified at the same time. I would be remiss had I not considered social contagion and peer influence as potential factors." Right, because people are transitioning because their friends are doing it and it's cool. You know, so this is a thing that's commonly called trans trenders, and this is an unfortunate fallacy belief that is very common in the TERF community, but actually a lot of trans people seem to buy into it as well. It's this idea that certain people are transitioning because it's trendy right now. And the problem I have with that theory is that at no point has it ever been trendy. Trans people are not exactly looked at as like, look at me! Don't you want to be this? Yelling on the internet because your favorite author decided to hate your existence? Don't you want to be me? Yeah. And the thing, like, let's pretend for a second entire friend groups are transitioning at the same time, as if this is like some pact that we're all going to transition together, like we're fucking 20-year-old women who are like, let's get pregnant together, let's transition together, oh my god. No, Mary, this is not fucking happening. And if it is, it's because, hey, all of these people just happen to be friends and just happen to realize, hey, we're all actually trans. Or you hear someone talk about something and you're like, oh my God, me too. Maybe I'm trans. Maybe young people should just be allowed to figure their shit out. You know, I will say the majority of my friends, the vast majority of my friends, are some flavor of queer. Some flavor of the LGBTQIA plus spectrum. And a lot of these friends I met long before they came out. Is it that we all just collectively decided together to be queer? No. It's because people grow and learn things about themselves, like the fact that they may in fact be trans. Understand? Social contagion. Littman mentioned Tumblr, Reddit, Instagram, and YouTube as containing factors to rapid onset gender dysphoria, where she believes that in the realm of transgender identification, youth have been particularly insular echo chambers. Rapid onset gender dysphoria. Hasn't that been disproven or something? I'm pretty sure this has been debunked. I've heard about this before. Maybe it's a real thing. I don't know. It just sounds fake. This idea of like rapid onset gender dysphoria, and it came out of nowhere, and we never had a clue, and therefore it can't possibly be real. Because, you know, people can't just realize shit by hearing about other people's experiences. The thing about Tumblr and Reddit and YouTube and Instagram and all of this is not that like, oh, it's really cool to be a trans person right now. It's more that trans people have a voice and a platform on these platforms. And so they're able to hear trans people's experiences and how they talk about things and say, hey, maybe I identify with this. Maybe this is me. And they should be allowed to explore that and talk to a therapist and maybe figure out, hey, something's going on here. And let me tell you, if a therapist is letting these children get hormonal therapy, they have good reason to do so because, and this is true, you have to like see a therapist before you're even allowed to start hormone replacement therapy. And that's just the tip of the iceberg to do anything. Like, they want to make sure that it's not another underlying condition. It's not something else. Like, you have to go through a lot of hoops just to be yourself as a trans person, just in America. I'm sure the UK is the same, and they're trying to do more to lock that shit down so children can't get therapy. So I'm fairly certain that if that's the case, children aren't just being overprescribed this medication. It's kind of like that scare that went around in like the 90s about children being overprescribed Ritalin. It's not a thing. These pharmacists are not getting kickbacks from the big pharma estrogen company. No, Mary, okay? Some people are just realizing who they really are. Let's continue. Her paper caused a furor. She was accused of bias and spreading misinformation about transgender people. Yeah. Subjected to a tsunami of abuse and concerted campaign to discredit both her and her work. Yeah. The journal took the paper offline and re-reviewed it before republishing it. However, her career took a similar hit to that suffered by Maya Forrester. Lisa Littman had dared challenge one of the central tenets of trans activism, which is that a person's gender identity is innate, like sexual orientation. Nobody, the activists insisted, could ever be persuaded into being trans. What possible motive would someone have to persuade people to be trans? Yeah, let's become a thing where your death rate goes higher. Most trans women of color are not expected to live past the age of 30. So, if you think people are doing this because it's cool, you are not paying attention. The argument of many current trans activists is that if you don't let a gender dysphoric teenager transition, they will kill themselves. And it happens. In an article explaining why he resigned from Tavistock, an NHS gender clinic in England, psychiatrist Marcus Evans stated that the claims that children will kill themselves if not permitted to transition do not align substantially with any robust data or studies in this area. Because a lot of these children who have killed themselves because they weren't allowed to transition were, spoiler alert, dead named by their parents because their parents didn't want them to transition, and so they didn't tell people that they wanted to fucking transition. Look at that poor girl, Leah Alcorn, back in like 2014, who stepped in front of a combine in her state, and her parents buried her under her boy's name and did not acknowledge who she was at all. That is the reality. So if there's no data, it's because people aren't sharing it. These parents don't want people to know that their kids are trans. And just because you're a psychiatrist, by the way, does not make you an expert on all things trans or even gender, okay? Psychology is constantly evolving. Up until a few years ago, and in the 1970s, being gay was considered a mental disorder. The more you know. Nor do they align with the cases I have encountered over decades as a psychotherapist. Okay, Mary. The writings of young trans men reveal a group of notably sensitive and clever people. Yeah. The more their accounts of gender dysphoria I've read, with their insightful descriptions of anxiety, dissociation, eating disorders, self-harm, and self-hatred, the more I have wondered whether if I'd been born 30 years later, I too might have tried to transition. Is she... Ma'am. It's not too late. You are more than welcome to transition, but you better get your facts straight about us first. Well, here's the thing, right? If you want to transition, by all means, but here's where the problem is. Self-hatred and gender dysphoria are not intrinsically linked. A lot of trans people can actually love themselves. Hi, how are you? I love myself. Not the point. The point is, you're ridiculous. You would not have transitioned. Don't fucking play this game. The allure of escaping womanhood would have been huge. I struggled with severe OCD as a teenager. If I had found community and sympathy online that I couldn't find in my immediate environment, I believe I could have been persuaded to turn myself into the son that my father had openly said he'd have preferred. That's unfortunate, but also persuaded, Mary?
No, persuaded.
Persuaded.
So basically she's saying you persuaded yourself.
No, she's saying that an online community of trans people have persuaded each other into becoming trans.
I know. That's...
I don't know how, but that's a thing, apparently, in her world.
Well, because she lives in La La Land.
When I read about the theory of gender identity, I remember how mentally sexless I felt in youth. Well, yeah, young people shouldn't feel...
Oh, you're doing a really bad job of backpedaling, lady.
Yeah, but
As usual,
yeah.
She's doing the backpedaling.
Yeah, it's really... That's an awkward sentence. I remember Colette's description of herself as a mental hermaphrodite, and Simone de Beauvier's words. It is perfectly natural for the future woman to feel indignant at the limitations posed upon her by her sex. The real question is why not is not why she should reject them. The problem is rather to understand why she accepts them. I don't know what this has to do with anything. As I didn't have a realistic possibility of becoming a man back in the 1980s, actually it still happened. It had to be books and music that got me through my mental health issues and the sexualized scrutiny and judgment that sets so many girls to war against their bodies in their teens. Now listen, this is something that is very important to talk about, and I'm not at all denying that. However, I don't really believe that a lot of girls are transitioning to avoid being sexualized because men don't give a shit. Ask butch lesbians. Trust. Your so-called butch friend will tell you. They don't fucking care. Fortunately for me, I found my own sense of otherness, and my ambivalence about being a woman reflected in the work of female writers and musicians who reassured me that in spite of everything a sexist world tries to throw at the female-bodied, it is fine to not feel pink, frilly, and compliant inside your own head. It is okay to feel confused, dark, both sexual and non-sexual, unsure of who you are. I love that she's really trying, again, I said this earlier and I'll say it again. There is a certain brand of white feminist victimhood that is prevalent throughout this essay. All of it is about how she's the poor little victim of this whole scenario. And I'm really getting tired of it. I want to be very clear here. I know transition will be a solution for some gender dysphoric people, although I am also aware through extensive research that studies have consistently shown that between 60 to 90% of gender dysphoric teens will grow out of their dysphoria. Then why don't you let them experiment? It is not a problem if they take hormones that just, it's not even a hormone, it's the antithesis of a hormone. When you take Spiro, it is literally to stop secondary sex characteristics. So at worst, they will just experience their puberty a little bit later. It does not stop fertility. It does not stop anything. You don't know what you're talking about. Again and again, I have been told to just meet some trans people. I have. In addition to a few younger people who were all adorable, I happen to know a self-described transsexual woman who is older than I am and wonderful. Wow, you know one single trans woman. That's amazing. By the way, a lot of older trans people do hold some of the same toxic beliefs as you, so that's not really going to help you, ma'am. Although she is open about her past as a gay man, I've always found it hard to think of her as anything other than a woman, and I believe, and certainly hope, she's completely happy to have transitioned. Being older, though, she went through a long and rigorous process of evaluation, psychotherapy, and staged transformation. Yeah, that's still the case. The current explosion of trans activism is urging a removal of almost all the robust systems through which candidates for sex reassignment were once required to pass. A man who intends to have no surgery and take up no hormones may now secure himself a gender recognition certificate and be a woman in the sight of the law. Many people aren't aware of this. They are not a man, they are a woman. If you identify as a woman, you are a woman. This is not difficult. We're living through the most misogynistic period I have experienced. Girl. Trans people allowed to transition, and that is somehow misogynistic. The white feminist victimhood is strong with this one. Back in the 1980s, I imagined that my future daughters, should I have any, would have it far better than I ever did. But between the backlash against feminism, no. There is no backlash against feminism. There is a new wave of feminism that is called intersectional feminism, and that includes more people. and a porn-saturated online culture, I believe things have got significantly worse for girls. Of course you do. Never have I seen women denigrated and dehumanized to the extent they are now. From the leader of the free world's long history of sexual assault accusations and his proud boast of grabbing women by the pussy, to incel involuntary celibate movement that rages against women who won't give them sex, to the trans activists who declare that TERFs need punching and re-educating, men across the political spectrum seem to agree. Women are asking for trouble. So, basically, you are saying that trans women are men, that trans women who suggest that TERFs are wrong are equivalent to incels and Trump. Have I got that correct? Because you're basically following all the worrisome patterns of comparing women, trans women, to rapists. So that's a problem. This is where we get into a situation where this is why people say you're a TERF, girl, because you are following the rhetoric to a T. And the problem is, as a trans woman, if I get angry about any of this, I am somehow now a man. The man just jumped out. That's how they act. Because I'm not allowed to be angry. I'm not allowed to be upset. I'm not allowed to have emotions because women don't have those. They are perfectly dainty little angels who never exhibit anger. Everywhere, women are being told to shut up and sit down or else. Girl, white women are being told that because their feminism is ridiculous. You're being told to shut up and sit down because you're ridiculous, not women. Don't misunderstand. I've read all the arguments about females not residing in a sexed body and the assertions that biological women don't have common experiences, and I find them too deeply misogynistic and regressive. How is it misogynistic and regressive to say that not all women have the same experiences? Some women have different experiences. If you're a woman of color, you're going to have different experiences than a white woman. If you're lesbian, you're going to have different experiences than a straight woman. What are you talking about? Not all women have the same experiences. That's not regressive to say. People have different experiences. What are you talking about? Literally, what are you talking about? It is also clear that one of the objectives of denying the importance of sex is to erode what some seem to see as the cruelly segregationist idea of women having their own biological realities, just as threatening, unifying realities that make them a cohesive political class. What? Okay, so basically what she's saying, from what I can understand, is that trans women are actually men who are trying to divide women, real women, in order to divide and conquer and basically ruin cis women's life and make them go back in the house, I guess. I think that's what she's saying. By which I can only say, no. No. This isn't about you, girl. See, this is the problem I have with J.K. Rowling right now. Not everything is about you. Not everything is about your vagina and your obsession with it, okay? No one is saying that your experience as a cis woman is not valid. What we're saying is it is not the only story. That is the problem. I don't know why you take offense to that. I don't know why you take offense to the idea that not every woman has the same experience, because every woman's life is different. Not every woman has the same experiences growing up, growing through childhood. Yes, a lot of things are similar. Yes, there are a lot of things that women have to deal with that cis men do not. But do not think for a second that trans women do not have to go through a lot of the same experiences. It's very interesting that you took the time in your original tweets to talk about the fact that trans women are often victims of male violence, and then you compare them to men who perpetuate violence against women, and you don't see the irony in your words. The hundreds of emails I have received in the last few days prove this erosion concerns many others just as much. It isn't enough for women to be trans allies. Women must accept and admit that there is no material difference between trans women and themselves. Nobody is saying these things. I don't know where you're getting this from. There's this fear-mongering that's going on between cis women amongst themselves. Nobody's saying this, okay? Yeah, there's differences between us. Clearly. The biggest difference being, I don't care what the fuck is in between people's legs. I don't care what gender you identify as. Do what you want, and I will support you. I don't see why this is such an offensive thing to you. But as many women have said before me, woman is not a costume. So now she's saying trans people are just dressing up. Woman is not an idea in a man's head. Woman is not a pink brain liking for Jimmy Choos or any other sexist ideas now somehow touted as progressive. Yeah, this is another thing about white feminism. People can like what they like. Guess what? If you like pink frills and shopping and Jimmy Choos, that is okay. Okay? Your feminism does not have to be you doing what everyone says you should do. That's kind of the opposite of feminism, actually. Just because a woman is telling you what to do does not make it feminism. That's not how this works. Oops. Okay, so let me just cut this here because I'm really fucking tired of this. I'm getting exhausted. I'm running out of steam to even bitch about this. So let's get to the point. None of this matters, okay? I don't know why J.K. Rowling decided to make Pride the time to attack trans women during the biggest political movement for Black Lives Matter, and the fact that she mentioned only briefly how trans women of color are particularly endangered by partners, by all different kinds of people, is kind of telling as far as I'm concerned. So let me break down this argument. On the one hand, she's saying that trans women pose no threat. On the other hand, she's essentially saying that trans women are predators, which is pretty old turf rhetoric that has A, no basis in reality, B, bullshit, and C, I'm just tired of it. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm done. You know what? J.K. Rowling, you're absolutely allowed to say whatever you want, but the rest of us are allowed to call you out on it. And as far as I'm concerned, you are dead to me. Goodbye.